Hello there. Here's hoping that all is well with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Rwanda is definitely playing host to one of the biggest events in the ICT's calendar, that is Transform Africa. And this particular event has brought right in the country several people from different walks of life. And one of them is none other than the UNESCO Director General, Irina Bokova, who's in Rwanda for the very first time. Welcome to Rwanda.
Thank you.
Probably we can start from there. We've just learned you from the Gisozi Genocide Memorial to pay tribute to the victims of the genocide against the Tutsis. Maybe before we delve into the conversation of Transform Africa today, your quick thoughts, first of all, on the transformation of Rwanda. You've landed here for the very first time. Some have been here before. They have had their stories to go back with. What would be yours?
I'm the first time in Rwanda, and I'm delighted to be for the first time in Rwanda for this major conference on Smart Africa that has become already a landmark into the new technologies, the partnerships with the private sector, the overall Africa Rise, I would say, strategy of the African Union. But it is not that I'm unfamiliar with Rwanda. We have been working with President Kagame, to whom I have deep respect and admiration for the last 6 years in the Broadband Commission, the Broadband Commission for Digital Development. Now we transform it also for the Sustainable Development Agenda, where he was the co-president with Carlos Slim and my dear friend Amadou Touré. At that time he was Director General of ITU. Now he's Executive Director of this Smart Africa Forum. We started this, I would say, incredible debate about the future of new technologies, how we leverage for development, for eradicating poverty, for competitiveness, for social inclusion, for solving the issues of education, of health, everything that is nowadays on the table. And it was not by chance that we offered President Kagame to become the co-chair, because exactly of his very strong vision of new technologies, of digital development for Rwanda, of his leadership, and also, I would say, of his very openness, international for Africa, for the world. And this is how I came to know Rwanda. Of course, UNESCO has many projects here, many projects linked with youth, with education, with open educational resources, with technical vocational training, and I come to your second part of your question about history, memory, the genocide, this terrible, tragic history in Rwanda, but which is I would say, a very telling lesson for the world. UNESCO has a developed program. In the last 8 years, I support it strongly, our Holocaust education and prevention of genocide, and also learning and teaching about the Rwandan genocide, among others, something that we have to teach, that we have to educate. We have to teach also peace, human rights, human dignity, to understand how hatred can transform into violence, and also, which is very impressive, how to overcome these very dark pages in one's history on the basis of truth, justice, and reconciliation.
Indeed. Now, if we now transition back to the Transform Africa Summit right here, you form part of the 30% of the women that are taking part or are attending the Transform Africa Summit. These are data from what the Minister of Youth and ICT of Rwanda splashed on the screen earlier this morning when the launch of the blueprint was being made. And this brings us to the question of the involvement of ladies and women in ICT. Does this concern you that only 30% of the total participants, or those who are really interested in ICT, are women? This is in line with the gender divide as far as ICT is concerned.
Well, it does not only concern me, but I would say that we have been putting, and I have been putting, a strong emphasis within the Broadband Commission and wider in the UNESCO's activities, empowering women, particularly when it comes to new technologies, ICTs. In fact, I was co-chairing the working group within the Broadband Commission, together with the CEO of GSMA, where we have proposed very concrete recommendations and to how to overcome this digital divide. And I would add something which is very alarming. The digital divide, in fact, has not closed but has slightly increased in the last years. So we have to have a little bit more sophisticated, more elaborate, to have more strong political will to change it. We need, first and foremost, to be sensitive towards this. We have to have strong policies. We see this policy here in Rwanda, and this is why this morning also President Kagame spoke about it. And I was before that in a very important meeting with the First Lady, Mrs. Jeanette Kagame, who was speaking about health and new technologies and innovation, encouraging young people to innovate. We need to get more girls into ICT sector. First, we need to get more girls into STEM education, science, technology, mathematics, to encourage them. In order to do this, we have to have the right approach, teachers, sensitive teachers. We have to develop the respective curricula. Even sometimes in the curricula of this education, girls have to see their role models. We need to do that. We have a very specific UNESCO program, partnership with L'Oréal about women in science, where every year we give an award to women from the 5 continents for their achievements, and we already have 2 Nobel Prize winners in genetics and in biology. And we have more than 2,000 young women researchers who have passed some training, fellowships in all different kind of renowned universities and research centers. So it can be done, but there should be a political will. There should be a very targeted strategies to do it, and with the support of partnerships, private partners, governments, it can be done.
Right. I'm going to pick it from the political will, because what we all understand is that different, Africa is not one country. It is, it comprises of very many other different countries. And each of these countries seem to all have either the lack or their being of political will in their own due respect. Some have different priorities as well. This brings us to the question of commitments to even following up to the implementation of some of the smart cities and Transform Africa agendas. How do we ensure that we're all speaking one voice?
Well, UNESCO is an intergovernmental organization. UNESCO is our 195 member states. And I think this is very important. What you said is so true nowadays. We have the Sustainable Development Agenda. Yes. We have a specific goal for education, goal number 4, where we say inclusive, equitable and quality education and lifelong learning for all with the specific targets. We have the inclusive cities, goal number 11. We have also goal number 5 about gender equality, and I can continue enumerating this. When we were elaborating these goals, it was a long process of consultative process with member states. So member states, political leaders have embraced these goals. They are theirs. Ownership is very important. What we are doing now, we have to hold accountable governments for what they have pledged to their own people, to the international community, and I would say to the others. Right. So how we do this? We do in different manners. We have an indicators. I'm speaking about education because I do believe, and Africa needs that, unless we massively invest in education, in skills, particularly when half of the population is young, maybe 60, 70% in the next decade, there won't be achievement in any of the Sustainable Development Goals. Young people want good education, they want skills, they want the opportunity to innovate, to imagine, to develop their skills. This is the only way for the future. And we have specific targets and indicators, and we are monitoring the implementation of these indicators. Or sometimes member states, governments in one particular region have a peer review. We convene them, they get together, they explain how they're achieving, what they're doing, how, so they hold each other accountable. Right. I think this is extremely important.
But how far can they go as far as holding each other accountable in terms of, let's say, country X fails to honor the commitments? What can country A do in terms of that peer review, in order to bring them back on board or to push them a little bit?
Well, this is, I believe, where partners like us or organizations like us are. Definitely there are countries which are struggling with the implementation for different reasons. There are post-conflict countries, there are countries which are attacked by extremists or their region. We know the Sahel is struggling. There are countries which are least developed countries which do not have the resources. I think we all have, one size does not fit all. We have to have a very targeted approach. In some countries we are working more to help them draft the right policy frameworks, in others to attract more financial resources from financial donors. In others, capacity building is what is missing. In third, they have a good system of primary, secondary education, but the higher education is lagging behind. So we have to have a very elaborate, targeted approach. The most important, I think, is that nowadays Agenda 2030 is agenda adopted and elaborated by governments, by countries themselves. It is not imposed on them. We are not imposing something, and they own it. So this is where we would, I would say, invite them for their political leadership, and we will accompany those who are lagging behind. And the others, we are supporting their efforts, because we know that if we can take Rwanda, is one of those examples which has a spectacular, I would say, development, not just in terms of economic growth, which definitely is there, it is visible, in terms of gender equality, which is one of those countries which is number one in terms of political participation, in terms also of new technologies in development. Of course, we are working and supporting issues like technical vocational training. We need to have more girls also in not so classical, I would say, jobs when we speak about technical vocational training. So there are many things that we should change, but I think Rwanda is one of those examples. There is the good mix of strong political leadership and vision, which we see in President Kagame. There is the clear strategy and plan of where he wants to lead the country, Plan 2020 and beyond, within the context, of course, of Africa Rise, of African Union. And also there is the good example of partnerships. Partnerships with the private sector, with the international organization, with the financial institutions. So I think this is a good example that others may follow.
Right. I like that you say others may follow. And I'm going to pick from there where you say that other countries can actually follow this. And you've actually thrown in a lot of really good flowers on Rwanda and the leadership as far as achieving this is concerned. Does it concern you that only 18 countries actually today have committed to the Transform Africa agenda, when we have 54 African countries that we need to be on board speaking one single voice? Because some people would say that, what happens then to those who are still behind, who have not yet committed? What do we do with them? Do we leave them? We say that the bus is already taken off. Those who don't want to come with us lag behind, or what do we do?
No, I think first you speak about Transform Africa. I'm looking rather at the Sustainable Development Agenda, where everybody committed. I think in a globalized world, we are all in one boat. I think we cannot afford to say we move and the others lag behind. I think what we see here in the Transform Africa, in Smart Africa, in all this forum, this is a perfect example of a country, Rwanda, which is moving forward, but the country does not want to move alone. And this is why this big platform of discussions and finding solutions with the other African leaders, with the international community wider, with the private partners. This is the way it works in the international community. This is the way also you help other countries, or Rwanda helps other countries get on board by involving them in this important discussion. Today we had the blueprint, also a very important document, and this is where countries may compare notes and see where they stay. Smart cities, I'm speaking about the topic of this conference, smart cities, to see how we can advance. Do we have a good example somewhere to take? Do we need partners? How we can move on? I think this is exactly what is needed in order for everybody to move on.
Right, but before I let you go, thirdly, you mentioned the issue of the blueprint. And reality versus what we all aspire to have is that most of the political leaderships in different African countries have their own sort of set agendas and priorities, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, the next issue that is also seen as a stumbling block is the change of governments for those who are actually going for elections. Most of the time, you would not see in their manifestos these issues highlighted in them in terms of wanting to transform the cities into smart cities. How then do we ensure continuity even after leader A gets off power and hands over to another leader who will also still continue on this legacy or also continue on this path of transforming their individual countries?
Well, you know, political processes are complex, and of course it's natural that every political leader in every country has an agenda. I do believe that every political leader has good intentions to transform the country, to make it a better place for the people. We should not in advance say that one or another political leader, because otherwise why these political leaders are there. I think this is where continuity, which is indeed critical, I agree, but this is where institutions like us, like UNESCO, or some other partners which are there, are trying to work in this continuum to promote policies which are from one government to another. And of course, it's a learning process. I think democracy is a complex issue. Even in the parts of the world where we consider that democracy is well established, we see that still there is a lot of need to continue, I would say, making it more participatory, more inclusive, because the world changes, economy changes. We are moving towards a different type of economy. We see populisms rising in many parts of the world, and I always say that populists are those who give simple answers to complex questions, and this is not the right policy in this environment. So I think it's just a process, and partners like us, the United Nations system, is there to work with governments, to ensure this continuity, to assist into the, as we say, development, in peace, in sustainable development. I see this enormous responsibility on our side, but partnering with governments is critical in these times.
Right. Finally, how then, or what could be the bottlenecks that you can point out and say, we need to remove this in line with what your role is, as you say, the enormous responsibility of partnering. But without commitment, then it becomes difficult. What other bottlenecks are you able to point out that you would call on governments to help or to facilitate?
I wouldn't say that there is one particular bottleneck or reason. As we just exchanged, there are countries which are really struggling with poverty. There are countries which have a mix of climate change challenges. I'm speaking again about the Sahel, about West Africa. I was discussing recently with our team who was in Nigeria. There was a consultations on Lake Chad, and because last year I visited many countries around Lake Chad. I went to Chad, I went to Niger. Before that I was in Cameroon, and I think this is one of those areas where all the challenges nowadays in terms of climate change, water resources, poverty, conflict, extremism, which is their gender, girls' education, and all this is a basket of all these problems. So I wouldn't say that there is only one. What is nowadays so obvious that the complexity of the challenges nowadays require really a multifaceted approach. And this is where I see our role once again as encouraging leadership, political leadership, into bringing international cooperation closer, into try to give responses to these challenges, which are very complicated sometimes. I'm speaking about extremism, instability, because if there is no peace, instability, there won't be development, and vice versa. So we are there to analyze, we are there to work with political leaders in the changing geopolitics and interconnectivity of the world. But I think, and once again come back to Rwanda and to this conference, that there are solutions definitely, and we should not be pessimistic. Rather, let's see what works in the different areas, and let's try to make it happen. It's doable.
Right. What do we do when we move from here, moving forward? Like quick takeaways in terms of when you go back to your office, what are some of the things that you will be taking back with you in terms of making this not just be a talking shop, but rather a place where action is now followed up and implemented to the letter?
Well, I'm much more even committed and much more, I would say, convinced of what UNESCO brings to this forum and to Africa overall. A strong drive for education, for skills, for young people, education for peace, education for reconciliation, technical vocational training, new technologies, innovation, how we encourage young people. We work a lot on open educational resources, universities, teachers, support. I'm much more optimistic that Africa is moving, Africa indeed is rising, and we have to leverage all our mandate in order to support countries to achieve what they have envisaged to achieve.
Thank you so much, Irina.
Thank you.
Thank you.